from LEX 18 News, with in-depth coverage of the issues that challenge Kentucky. This is State of the Commonwealth with your host, Conroy DeLuche.
Good morning and welcome to State of the Commonwealth. I'm Conroy DeLuche. Hard to believe, but we're just 2 days away from Election Day, and a record number of Americans have voted early in this election. As of Friday morning, more than 79 million Americans have cast their ballots already, and that includes over 1 million Kentuckians. That's according to data compiled by the NBC News Decision Desk and Target Smart, a Democratic political firm. The Decision Desk projects the early voting number could reach 100 million by Election Day. Over the past few weeks, we've talked about how vastly different this election season is, and that will culminate in a very different election night. Secretary of State Michael Adams has told us that in Kentucky, we can expect to learn a lot on November 3rd, but nationwide, there may be a wait.
All the in-person votes will be counted. That'll be 70% of the vote. Most of the absentees will be counted. So that'll be most of the remaining 30%. So I think we'll be at 85%, maybe even 90% of the vote counted election night. We'll be way ahead of the rest of the country. In Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, they're going to take weeks to count their ballots. They're much more reliant on absentee balloting than Kentucky is. And they have said they're not going to start the process of processing those until after the election is over. It'll be a week or two before we know who the president is. I just want to caution everyone, it's going to be a long week or two.
We asked LEX 18 political analyst Bob Babbage for his perspective on what a Secretary of State does on election night, a role he served in Kentucky in the mid-90s.
Secretary of State worries. You are paid to worry and check and be attentive to problems. There are always, with multiple locations and machines and people who are experienced or not so much, there's always going to be a little bump somewhere. And the Board of Elections and the Secretary of State are constantly troubleshooting to make sure things go as well as possible.
While we should know where most races in Kentucky stand at the end of election night, they are not official results.
They're not final until the State Board of Elections, a 7-member group chaired by Ben Chandler, well-known person here, when they put their stamp on it, then the results are final. But you pretty much know where things stand in Kentucky on election night because our system works so well compared to some others.
As for the presidential race, winning the state of Kentucky awards 8 electoral votes. On election night, you'll see projected totals, but once again, that's not an official result. I asked Babbage to explain that process.
The states have their electors meet. When I was Secretary of State, we met in the Supreme Court. It was a very elegant location, and the electors of the winning party then cast their vote, and that becomes official for our state at that time. And we haven't had situations across the country where electors have changed that I can remember any time recently. So you do expect the electors for Trump or Biden to cast the votes for Trump or Biden around the country, and there's not going to be much movement there. I mean, things could be close in terms of the electoral vote. We just don't know yet. But that's how the process works.
And while Election Day is Tuesday, don't forget you can vote tomorrow as well. There are early voting sites set up across the Commonwealth, and as a reminder, here's a list of locations to cast your ballot here in Lexington. If you have not turned in your absentee ballot, you need to hurry. That's due on Election Day as well, or if you mail it, it must be postmarked that day. Voter turnout is on track to be the highest since perhaps 1992 in Kentucky when Babbage was Secretary of State. Politically, the Bluegrass was a very different state. Back in '92, it was reliably blue. The big winners that night in Kentucky, Democrat Bill Clinton, who captured the electoral votes on the way to defeating incumbent President George H.W. Bush. Democrat U.S. Senator Wendell Ford won a second term, his last in Washington before retiring. Ford is the last Democratic U.S. Senator from Kentucky. And in the 6th congressional district race, a Democrat, Scotty Basler, captured the seat. You also had Democratic control in both the House, the Kentucky State House, and the state Senate. Contrast that to now, where Republicans control both chambers in Frankfort. Republican President Donald Trump is expected to win the state once again. Mitch McConnell is favored to win re-election, and Congressman Andy Barr is running for his 5th term representing Central Kentucky. And we're going to stay in the 6th district now, where 2 challengers are looking to unseat Congressman Barr. There is a Libertarian candidate on the ballot. That's Frank Harris. But we're going to focus more on Barr's competitive opponent, Marine veteran and local attorney Josh Hicks, a Central Kentucky Democrat who thinks that his background makes him the ideal candidate to beat Barr. LEX 18's Mike Valenti with more on the race.
You won't find a whole lot of parallels between the race for the 6th District in 2018 and in 2020. This time around, no national political figures have flown in to stump for the candidate.
Andy Barr is a great congressman.
Amy is using all of her skill.
And the race hasn't garnered the same level of attention or fundraising as Barr's last contest against Amy McGrath did. But the tension has not diminished.
Andy Barr is saying he will always protect people with pre-existing conditions. But I can't let a lie as dangerous as that stand.
Why are Nancy Pelosi's allies bankrolling Josh Hicks's campaign?
Josh Hicks will be another vote for Nancy Pelosi's radical agenda.
The candidates' latest back and forth came amidst news that OxyContin maker Purdue Pharma had to pay $8 billion in penalties as part of a guilty plea to federal crimes, with Hicks calling for Barr to return campaign contributions from the drug maker.
That is a relatively small gesture that he could make to show that he's not bought and paid for, and unfortunately, he wasn't even willing to go that far.
If my opponent would like to return the hundreds of thousands of campaign contributions that he has received from liberals in Washington, D.C. and out-of-state trial lawyers, then we can talk about campaign donations.
When the candidates aren't attacking each other, they've each been trying to make the case why they're best suited to lead the 6th District through the pandemic. For Barr, he's leaning on his record. He says his constituents know he's delivered for them, whether it comes to voting for economic relief or securing PPE.
The fact that we've delivered several shipments of personal protective equipment from the Strategic National Stockpile at the outset of the outbreak. We changed a national rule on in-hospital telehealth, expanding telehealth services.
In addition, the congressman has touted his position on the House Republican task force designed to investigate the Chinese Communist Party.
On the same day that I was actually introducing legislation to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for this novel pandemic outbreak, my opponent was opening up a medical malpractice law firm to sue doctors and hospitals.
That's a lie.
And
Hicks' campaign has called that attack misleading, noting the lawsuits in question have nothing to do with COVID-19. Hicks does say he believes in holding China accountable if the country did indeed conceal critical information about the virus. But he says Americans need to be held accountable too for what he calls a lack of leadership, from the president to Congressman Barr.
He could have pulled together and issued statements contradicting some of the false narrative that came out of the White House. He could have done a number of things that said, this is a serious virus. This is going to kill Americans. This is going to destroy our economy. This is going to highlight all the failures in our healthcare system.
If Hicks were elected, he says he'd advocate for a Medicare buy-in public option, not Medicare for all. And he says people who have pre-existing conditions, including his mom, need to be protected. Barr has said the same thing about pre-existing conditions, despite repeatedly voting in the past against the Affordable Care Act during his time in Congress.
You know, it's strange to hear someone talk about their accomplishments after voting dozens of times to rip healthcare away from 400,000 Kentuckians before this pandemic.
In response to Hicks, Barr's campaign called this dubious, to say the least. His campaign manager telling LEX 18 News Barr has, quote, voted repeatedly, including 3 times this session of Congress alone, to protect and mandate coverage for Americans with pre-existing conditions.
In their one and only debate that aired on KYT, Barr alluded to his wife, who died due to a heart condition earlier this year.
To suggest that I don't want to protect people with pre-existing conditions is downright offensive. The fact of the matter is, politicians like my opponent and Nancy Pelosi, the difference between them and me on pre-existing conditions is that they think the only way you can protect people with pre-existing conditions is to support a law that doubled and tripled premiums.
If reelected, Barr says he would continue to focus on defeating the virus and implementing recommendations made on the China task force. Both candidates say a stimulus package must be passed into law to bring Americans economic relief. As for Hicks, he says his priorities in Congress would include promoting bills on infrastructure, expanding broadband, and lowering prescription drug prices.
I do not need a political career, but what I do need is an opportunity to serve the people of Kentucky, an opportunity to show them that government can be competent, it can be compassionate, it can be empathetic.
Current projections like the Cook Political Report give Congressman Barr the upper hand in the race. But Hicks believes his status as a political outsider carries weight, much like it did for another political newcomer, at the top of the ticket in 2016. For State of the Commonwealth, Mike Valenti, LEX 18 News.
As Mike previously mentioned, the 2020 race for the 6th District doesn't quite have the national attention of the Barr-Amy McGrath 2018 clash. But two of the big names that flew into rally support for their party's candidate that year are the two men running for president. On October 12, 2018, former Vice President Joe Biden traveled to Bath County to stump for Amy McGrath. One day later, President Trump traveled to Richmond to rally in support of Barr. Here's what they had to say about their preferred candidates.
We love Kentucky. Greatest horses in the world and plenty of other things are going to elect an incredible slate of Republican candidates. Andy Barr is a great congressman.
Amy is using all of her skill and all of her knowledge, her determination to level the playing field for people in Bath County, for people in Kentucky, for people all around America, because so many people have been left behind.
That's certainly not the last time Trump has visited central Kentucky. He led a rally at Rupp Arena the night before the 2019 statewide races. Now Trump is projected to win Kentucky once again this year, as he did in 2016, with 62.5% of the vote over Hillary Clinton. Hillary's husband, former President Bill Clinton, was the last Democratic candidate to capture Kentucky's electoral votes. That was back in 1996 when he defeated Bob Dole. Trump and Biden are not the only choices for president here in Kentucky. There are three more names on the ballot. There are two independents, Brock Pierce and Kanye West. Yes, Kanye. And Joe Jorgensen, the Libertarian candidate. Up next on State of the Commonwealth, we'll take a look at the race for U.S. Senate. We'll be right back.